I think the issue with Indonesia is not only monetary, but it is also fiscal. Fiscal in the sense that are we going to be able to collect tax revenues as much as we have been? Mind you, this is a country that is largely commodity driven. 70% of its budget has been hinging on energy and commodities. And at the rate that it's struggling to diversify away from the commodities, I think we need to find solutions on how to game change the fiscal space of this country, in addition to how to deal with some neighboring countries who might do their own version of quantitative easing, which certainly has and will have an effect on economies like Indonesia. This tells you how vulnerable we are. 50 to 60% of the markets is basically owned and dominated by foreign money. And foreign money, as of today, is looking for the right places. And it's a bit ironic in that capital today is actually very cheap, and we're likely to see a sustained period of low interest rate environment, but we're not capitalizing on this to the extent that investment realization as of 2015 is only growing by 9%, when in the past we were able to grow at 30 to 35%. And for those who know a bit about Indonesia versus China, China runs at a fixed capital formation ratio of 50%, whereas Indonesia runs at a fixed capital formation ratio of only 32%. And I think it needs to move up the needle from 32% to anywhere around 40% if we were to be able to or to want to improve the quality of the infrastructure and the quantity of the infrastructure also. So at the rate that we're not getting investments from around the world as much as we used to, I think we need to rejig the economic structure or formula for the country. And this will have an effect on Southeast Asia, because Southeast Asia is highly influenced by the stability or the quality of economic trajectory in Indonesia, which makes up about 40 to 45% of Southeast Asia's economy. This is another behavior that's worth observing. There's basically only 27 million people in Indonesia that are paying taxes or supposed to be paying taxes. You put that in the context of 255 million people. Right there, you know there's a lot of people who are not paying taxes, right? And if you take a look at the ratio of tax, meaning the ratio of tax revenues vis-a-vis the GDP of the country, it's only at 10.8%. To give you perspective, the average OECD country runs at a tax ratio of 30%, right? But here's the good part. Even with a ridiculously low tax ratio, the corporates in Indonesia are paying 25% tax. And if you're publicly listed, they're actually paying 20%. So if you're not publicly listed, you're paying 25% tax. And if you're listed, you pay only 20%. So imagine if we were to grow the tax ratio from 10.8% to, let's say, 15 or even 20%. I mean, we're talking about the potential of our being able to lower tax rates to maybe 10%. We could be highly, highly competitive vis-a-vis the Singapores and the Hong Kongs of the world. So this is, I think, the lingering question for policymakers or anybody that wants to be participatory in the economic story of Indonesia. I've been quite vocal in advocating for a tax amnesty. And that, I believe, is one way to game change the fiscal space of Indonesia. I think it's going to be difficult. It's going to take a long time for us to reconfigure the structure of our fiscal space from commodities-centric to non-commodity-centric. We can do it, but it's going to take time, and I'm not sure if time is on our side. One way to game change the fiscal space is to just do a tax amnesty, and it's likely that the Parliament is going to be approving of a potential tax amnesty bill in the next 3 to 6 months. When that happens, it's going to provide both a fiscal solution and also a monetary solution. This is where the challenge is. When we talk about Indonesia's fiscal space, the budget in terms of what the tax revenues are supposed to be for 2015 is 1,294 trillion rupees. That's a lot of zeros, but it's pretty much equivalent to about 100 billion US, almost. But look at the collection. Until the end of August, only 46% of the target has been collected. So if you extrapolate the next 4 months of 2015, it's going to be very difficult to collect the remaining 54%, which I think poses the question as to whether or not we're going to be fiscally robust. We have been fiscally robust for the last 10 years thanks to the commodities boom, but without that and with what we're seeing in the Middle East, I think oil price is likely to stay low for the near foreseeable future. So 2015 is a question mark. 2016 is, again, likely to be a question mark in terms of our ability to collect taxes, which is why some, including myself, have advocated for a game-changing tax amnesty. Beyond that, what would a country like Indonesia do from a non-fiscal standpoint? I don't see any reason as to why Indonesia would not consider its own version of quantitative easing at the rate that everybody else is doing or contemplating doing its own version of quantitative easing. I'm speculating, I think China is likely to do another round of quantitative easing in the early part of 2016. That, I think, will bear some challenges for neighboring countries in Asia, and I think will probably make some neighboring countries do their own version of quantitative easing. Now, the challenge for Indonesia is that it's unique and different from other countries who are experiencing deflationary pressure environment, whereas Indonesia has been inflationary, even this year, when commodities prices are actually at a low time, an all-time low. So the key is, how do we make sure that prices are stable? 30 to 40% of the consumer price index for Indonesia is actually related to food staples. And a good chunk of the food staples as a determinant of inflation is actually chili, because Indonesians love spicy food. And when we run out of chili, we actually import chili from places like India, Thailand, and Vietnam. So if anybody in the policy-making body were to want to do any quantitative easing, putting liquidity in the market, he or she needs to make sure that price stability is there. Better yet, there should be some deflationary tendencies. So he or she should be mindful of how to manage and control price levels of the food staples. Here's the problem. The problem is the government has been tending to be a little bit nationalistic as of late. Protectionist policies are pervasive. So this is where I think if anybody were to consider doing some sort of quantitative easing, he or she would have to sound a lot less nationalistic, because they need to open up the gates for importation of food staples as to help bring about stability on prices.